working with the local councils to make sure that the clean air zones are kept as small as possible. They're brought in as late as possible, which allow industry to have time to adapt and make sure they have cleaner vehicles that can operate in the zones. And then also last year, July, there was the Road to Zero document, which in that was introduced a 15% voluntary commitment from HGVs. So that's a 15% reduction in greenhouse gas tailpipe emissions by 2025. But there were some supportive measures in there that MTA lobbied for. One of them was the real need for an ultra emission truck definition. Because without that, manufacturers don't know what they're working towards, which means the vehicles aren't available for industry to purchase. Recently, this year, they've also legislated, it's not 80% we're working towards now, it's net zero by 2050, which is a real struggle for us because the heavier up the vehicle you get, diesel is the only option at the moment. But they're also looking at TRU, so that's transport refrigeration units, which of course a lot of them run on red diesel as well. So there's loads of different factors that we're all trying to work for and trying to comply with.
So government have said lots and lots of policy, lots of stuff that you need to comply with, some of it with very tight timescales around clean air zones. And that puts enormous pressure, as Sarah has found, on the people trying to do a job. Sarah, talk to us about your experience of implementing a low emission zone, the ultra low emission zone, clean air. How easy is it?
You've just got lots of different aspects to look at, whether your depots have got enough power within the depots, which some of ours have not. So we're having to pay extortionate amounts of money to get more power into the grid. Well, I think the 2021 for South and North and South Circular there'll be a lot more on the market. All manufacturers seem to be gearing up for 2020, 2021. But at this moment in time when we've started, unless it's a smaller vehicle, it's been really difficult.
Going back to the Road to Zero policy and the more holistic view, we have done a really, really good job of decarbonising power in the UK, but we're lagging behind on vehicles or transport, and we're lagging behind on construction and buildings. And that's why recently we've seen such a push for the fleets market to start adopting electric fleets.
That there's a real nervousness about heavily investing. The local authorities are supposed to stand up and be the beacon for everyone to sort of follow. But the investment is huge and it's outdated within months. There's a real nervousness about going full bore into it because the technology changes within months of purchasing. And also it is massively more expensive.
It's got to be a much more holistic view around electric vehicles. We're all touching on the infrastructure that we need to power those vehicles, to get those benefits for their low emissions out on our roads. But equally, again, touch on the renewable energies, but when you're putting that energy into a truck, as the technology is going to evolve, batteries are going to improve, they might not necessarily use up the full 100% of that battery. So then it's when they've finished their day's run, coming back and then putting that remaining battery life back into the infrastructure.
It's about getting your technology right to then enable you to move forward at the right pace. And that's largely dictated by
it's a horse and cart scenario.
How your region needs to operate. Because you could put something in now that's going to help you out for 10 years, but you don't know what that needs to look like and you don't know what products are going to be available.
It's going back to that conversation about making sure that different government departments are aligned within the policies that they bring out. And when there's no alignment, when there are distractions like the B word, which I don't know.
Thank you for not mentioning.
It leaves a lot of knowledge gaps. And I think with government, it's making sure that those policies are aligned so that we don't get pushbacks here and support here. You know, when you talk about changes to the grid and targeted charging review and things like that, it's for industry, it's very hard for us to wait 3 or 4 or 5 months and keep our businesses going within those months and not having a clear policy steer.
The LEZ and ultra low emission zone, when you look at our website, you think that the LEZ, the ultra-fine emission zone, is the big next big thing.
Yeah.
It's not.
No.
It's the LEZ.
Yeah.
It's done in priority, and the LEZ that comes all the way out to the M25
Yeah.
happens next year.
Yeah.
Is at the bottom.
Yes.
To me, that's the complete answer.
Yeah.
So when you look at it, because we haven't got time to sit there, go, let's just double check this wording on this. Ah, it does.
Yeah.
You skim it, and if you go look at this down there, oh, that's like what, it's 3. And that's important.
And that's why this is so important, because there are lots of people who are far less clued up on exactly what's happening when than you are, and they're going to catch a cold.
Yeah. I don't think the technology's there. Well, the technology is not there to power an 18-ton truck on an electric battery.
Nice enough.
Like, to give you a commercial distance and road, like you're going to lose about 1.5 ton, I reckon, of carriage through implementing batteries.
I've only got this square mile to run everything, so I can get a 26 tonne or an 18 tonne to run on a battery and tried it. But my mileage is not that far, and I've got to have places to charge it.
Why is the conversation, when we talk about renewables, never consider the benefits of natural gas as a technology that's currently present, where the technology exists all the way up to a 44 ton? But you can implement it.
So
It's a renewable fuel. There's gas station infrastructure that's being built out across the country, and it's available today. So it's action that can be taken to decarbonize transport. It might not get you to that 100% zero tailpipe target that you might have for 2030, but you can act today and make a difference.
I quite like the idea of subsidising the dirty fossil fuel, utilising that infrastructure support and just putting a clean fuel in there. I think if we can achieve that's a big tick for us.
Do you find there's a lot of pushback against alternatives?
I think it's uncomfortable because it takes a commitment to something that they're not used to and changing their operational approach. In a lot of cases where you're used to diesel, you fill it up at the station you're familiar with, it's predictable, your service technicians are all trained to service your fleet. There's nothing nuanced about how you go about your day-to-day business. Whereas you embrace something that's different, there's always a resistance to change. And I think that's part of what's holding it back is unless you can get past that, it's going to involve a little bit of uncomfort up front until you build that competence. You're fighting a losing battle trying to sell that proposition on someone who resists change.
There's an area that's not been sort of talked about, because you're talking about what's immediately in front of them, you're talking about what the government policies are and what's driving them. But raw materials.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, if you do batteries.
If you want to make a battery, there's lots of raw materials. Yeah. Last week there was an article about cobalt. Cobalt is part of the batteries. Yeah. And it's being dug out of the ground.
Yeah. Yep.
And the environmental issues, you dig it out of the ground in South America, you dig it out of the ground in Africa, you dig it out of the ground in Australia.
Yeah.
You ship it by boat to China and the Far East, but there's a big drive towards electric vehicles. Well, it's a big drive, numbers-wise, is towards cars and electric vehicles. The commercial vehicles are lagging behind, but it's to do with battery production. We've been smart about making the batteries, changing the technology, but it's raw materials.
Yeah.
If it's a government policy, I read somewhere that the Chinese government has signed up a deal to take 60% of one of the raw materials making into batteries. So that's leaving the rest of the world scrabbling for 40% of the production. So if everybody wants that 40%, no wonder the vehicle manufacturers are hesitating about committing into technology when they can't they're looking forward for the raw materials, but there's a government policy from elsewhere that's driving that says this is good, we'll do this.
As industry, we have to have a unified voice to some extent. If government are hearing, oh, the batteries are too expensive, or there's not enough supply, or there's not enough infrastructure, what is the actual real problem that we are having?
All the things you say are things that get lobbied for.
Absolutely.
Like say, collectively and by the individual organisations, and it's just ensuring that the technology is right to enable the market to move on in the right direction.
There are those out there who would say even now that the technology is right to a certain extent, and whilst we can't solve the problems of a 44 tonner becoming electric today, there are some changes that can be made, CNG, hydrogen, whatever it might be, that could be made to start that process.
If the authority gets granted that money, I think it needs to switch its entire fleet to an alternative fuel. I think, as it's been described here, electronic is very, very marginalised. It's very limited and it will not satisfy the whole fleet. Whereas alternative fuel technology with perhaps fuel stations issuing liquid hydrogen, whatever it is, that's possibly better. So is it a case of actually we could switch the fleet quicker to an alternative fleet, fuel, by adopting something that would possibly be able to fuel the whole fleet?
So you're an all or nothing guy?
Well, it changes so much, technology changes so much.
If you lease a vehicle, it de-risks that proposition for you in that if the technology doesn't work out after whatever the lease period is, you give it back. And so you can use capital for the things that matter, the big infrastructure projects, and you use resource budget for the leasing, which allows you then to free up that capital but still maintain services.
Yeah, I think there are quite different few options from a funding perspective that would you know, as rightly say, release capital for you to spend elsewhere within your business or your council or wherever it may be, and that they can be with balloon payments in, so you can own the assets, they can come with and without maintenance. We've got different packages on top of the services that come with standard, so they can be breakdown recovery, we can manage short-term hire provision for any downtime, accident management, all these sort of added on benefits that can be introduced. So, you know, for me, I think it is. 5 years ago, we purchased over 100 Nissan MV200s on behalf of British Gas. They've been running for 5 years. We've got over 2 million miles worth of running on those. So it's pretty impressive. And even now that they're coming to the end of that cycle, the battery recharge rate is still in the 90% mark, so it's still good to go. We're now finding other companies, some of the small logistics and parcel companies, and then saying, well, can we take those on for another 12 or 24 months because they want to see what it's like for them to run it. So we're then seeing them go already into the 6th year, potentially into the 7th year. So I'm on board with Joel now. I think there's a real mix of different options now. At the moment, that's a sort of 3.5 ton light commercial range. I think that there are real viable electric options that are fully supported by the manufacturers, who are on their sort of second or in some cases third generation on their battery tech, which is great. Above that, that's where I think we can see the other alternative fuels like gas, that's whether that's CNG, LNG, hydrogen as well. There's some real options there, and again, manufacturers are supporting that. One of the big home delivery companies has just purchased 18 Iveco LNG tractor units. We're now in the process of supporting them from a funding perspective to finance the gas refueling station at one of their depots. Again, so that's taking some of the pressure off on the capital element, that's providing a total solution.
There's a preconception about a negative experience with natural gas as the fuel because a lot of that experience comes from the days of dual fuel, when the technologies were different and people were taking a diesel engine, converting it, and running it on both fuels. You're basically trying to deploy an unoptimized solution into your fleet. And because the companies that were facilitating that weren't going back to those customers and ensure that they had a good customer experience and were well supported on the service side, I think it got a black eye. Fast forward 10 years, and now we've got OEMs building dedicated vehicles with dedicated gas trucks that are meant to operate on that fuel. You've got all the service dealers set up to support those vehicles. You've also got a biomethane industry that's developing gas and feeding it into the grid and ensuring that you're decarbonizing what would otherwise be polluting gas coming from waste. And you've got a circular life cycle that involves a small marginal increase in vehicle cost that you can deploy to those vehicles that make sense today. And I don't think it makes sense in any truck that does less than 100,000 kilometers a year. But for those that do that amount and more, it's been proven. We've got examples with Waitrose where they paid off their capital investment increase on vehicles within 2 years. And it's gravy after that because of the delta in fuel price. History of natural gas as a fuel doesn't dictate the future of it. The infrastructure side of it, we're lucky in this country to have such a great pipeline infrastructure of natural gas. So finding the core needs to put a gas station in is quite solvable. And you've got now a burgeoning group of station infrastructure builders who are looking for customers willing to put the fleets in to justify station. So it always circles back to the economics have to make sense, and it's not only for the fleet, but also for the person who's making that investment in the infrastructure. It pencils out to the point where you can justify investing in enough vehicles that they can then put a station in. It's only going to enable those around you to make that same move. Those within proximity who have access to that station. So I think, you've got a few existing stations and you're starting to see fleets within proximity to that station start to make those moves. It's going to happen. It is happening.
We're still hearing a lot of that uncertainty from our members, and whilst I completely appreciate you can't not move forward because of what happened with previous generations, I think it is important to recognise that there is a lot of uncertainty and kind of fear within the industry, especially from those that did invest in trucks and they were found to be no better. And so there is that wary of investing in the wrong technology, because it doesn't just come down to a financial decision for them, but it is the certainty as well that a truck needs to be able to do its job, it needs to be able to perform, it needs to be reliable, and it's their jobs on the line at the end of the day if they make that one decision.
So it's a matter of them understanding that the mistakes of the past that have stung them aren't existing if you take a different route, you're not converting a vehicle. And I can understand, having been one of those customers, how you'd be very tentative to embrace something that carries that risk. But I think it's a different time, and there's different technology that needs to be recognized. It's important that we continue to publicize this. We have these forums, we did talk about it, we dispel the myths and educate with whatever means possible.
And we're reliant upon, I think, groups of people and commercial magazines and all that, of keeping us informed and letting us know what's going on in the FTA or something like that. So we should be inundated really with where the industry is moving to and all that. And to be honest, it's hard.
We've got to match the reality with the rhetoric. And I think that's where we've got to be careful with the case studies. We've got to be out there pushing the boundaries and telling the stories. But they've got to be the real stories that can be backed up and people can follow through on. Because otherwise we keep selling a fairy tale. Yeah. And 10 years down the line, I'm still writing the same stuff that I was writing 10 years ago because the industry hasn't actually caught up with the rhetoric yet. And that is where the risk has to come in, because you will hear the stories and what works for one won't work for somebody else. And you'll run exactly the same scenario, but it just won't function because your operational requirements are slightly different. And there is going to have to be that element of bravery, I think, from people taking a risk, taking a gamble, in order to move that technology debate onwards.
It's just insurance fit for purpose, isn't it? That's one of the things we've looked at, the long-term plan for the AA and our vehicles, is that when there is something fit for purpose, it can be used.
All our divisions are putting in electric power plants. Across Hounslow we fit them to every fourth and fifth lamppost, just to give that addition. The problem we've got is we can do all this, and we can get all the 3.5 tonners, if they work, to be electric. We can't do anything about the bigger stuff. And that's the frustration we've got. The likes of Mercedes, Volvo, Scania, they're building these vehicles. They're building the odd one or two. Our vehicle have now built the CNG, Volvo built the CNG. But the smaller vehicles. And they're investing millions and millions of pounds. They're not going to release anything onto the market until they're sure that they can make a profit.
They've got as well as they've got all the research and development to bring that product to market. Yeah. Is that going to be the right product at that point in time.
And will it
And
match
for the next 5 to 10 years.
And
then
the other systems, the other manufacturers, are they in the same place?
Yeah.
So I think some mentioned Betamax and VHS earlier on. And that's it, the analogy is perfect, right, isn't it? Which way do you go? Some people want Betamax, some people want VHS, and if you don't understand it, I'm not going to explain it.
A lot of blank faces gone.
I think that we need an alternative fuel, not necessarily electric, that will give us the same output and the weight that we can carry out for the gross vehicle
Yeah.
weight.
Well, we've got relationships with fuel station providers who have gone as far as purchasing vehicles as a non-haulier, so that they can trial it out to customers and say, run this for 2 weeks at your standard operation. We'll show you how much you save on fuel. You'll get the driver experience with the driver feedback operating an alternative fuel. They're so invested in the belief that the business case exists, and all you have to do is try it to believe it. You'll get the opportunity to demo it, and you can have that experience, see the numbers, see what it looks like, and then decide for yourself. CNG is in its pure form as it's found in the ground or as it's produced through biomethane, as biomethane. Liquid, you have to process it in order to chill it down and get it into liquid form. The advantage of LNG is you can fit more fuel in a limited space on a vehicle. The trade-offs are driver acceptance, because the fueling experience isn't as favorable as CNG, where it's
Yeah.
there are trade-offs. There's great pipeline infrastructure. I think there's a solid business case for CNG in the UK. And we're starting to see that movement with the stations that are going up, the fleet adoption, the acceptance that we're starting to see. So things are moving in the right direction. CNG, where CNG has a business case because of the cost for it, is high mileage.
High mileage, right, okay.
It is cleaner than diesel, unquestionably. If you're investing in alternative fuels, you want to pick one horse and run with it, and you have the fueling infrastructure, you make a solid business case for CNG, regardless of mileage. Improve your footprint.
Okay.
What is government doing to make the manufacturers
Incentive.
bring the product to market?
Yeah,
That's
that's what we're waiting for.
Yeah.
Or an
Ask
alternative.
them as
It
well.
doesn't have to be electric, it just needs to be an alternative fuel.
Yeah.
It could be hybrid.
That's the lever that needs to be
Yeah.
put in place, that doesn't seem to be there.
Yeah, so they are, we've been pushing government to bring forward this definition, which they have agreed to, they are working on, which is the optional emission truck definition. So what they're working on doing now is assessing baselines, because what you need to do is find out what the trucks are currently, then you've got low emission, and it's then going to the ultra low. So they're going to work out, who's working out to figure out what specifications does the ultra low truck need to be.
Right.
And it's our hope that once we have that definition, manufacturers will know what they're working towards, which will then mean vehicles are coming, which should hopefully then spur infrastructure, and it should hopefully start happening. But that is hopefully coming after April next year.
What is the best way for us to take the challenges that we face nationally to government, to give them the evidence they need to support us?
There is work that is ongoing, but we have got to a really tough point in terms of political climate, that things aren't going through as quickly as we need them to go through.
What is the government strategy to allow the commercial vehicle industry to meet the government's own emissions target? I think there's two streams to that statement, isn't there? Is what's the expectation of an operator of commercial vehicles, and what's the expectation of a manufacturer? So what's the government's expectation?
It's tangible. It is just actual, it's not a call to action.
No.
In commercial vehicle world, that's clear.
So, it seems that we need government to support CNG as a way forward for HGVs. That's what we're asking to do.